Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michael Scheffler. I'm Associate Dean for the Arts in the College of Arts and Letters at Notre Dame, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this year's first installment of Ahead of the Game. This is our football season lecture series, which is sponsored by the college. Over the course of the season, we'll be hearing from faculty members from all over the College of Arts and Letters who will talk to us about their research in accessible and engaging ways. We're delighted to have you here today, and we'll hope to see you again at the next installment of this series when my colleague Heather Miner will talk about what she calls the hidden history of Notre Dame. This is a subject she explores in a course where undergraduate students do research in the university archives and make discoveries about our history that are often surprising. But before I introduce our speaker today, I would just like to thank our colleagues in the Department of Music and the program in Sacred Music for allowing us to use this beautiful space today. I'd also like to give special thanks to Becky Badger, Senior Administrative Coordinator in the Office of the Dean of the College of Arts and Letters, who worked with our speaker, the Communications Office, and many others to make this event happen. And now to introduce our speaker. Ranjot Singh Dhaliwal is the Ruth and Paul Idzik Collegiate Assistant Professor in Digital Scholarship. He's based in the Department of English, where he researches and teaches about the aesthetic, political, and economic entanglements of our technological cultures. He's currently at work on a book about how our cultural narratives, political and economic formulations and beliefs get crystallized into computational hardware and software architecture. His lecture today, Citizen Science Meets Science Fiction, focuses on the ways in which video games have come to serve as portals to innovative research projects. Please join me in welcoming Ranjot Singh Dhaliwal.
Thank you so much, Michael. I'd also like to thank, before I begin, Dean Mastillo, the whole crew at Arts and Letters, Becky, everyone at the Neil Hall for making this possible. I know all of you have a bunch of different places on campus that you could be here, and you chose to be here still, so I'm thankful for all of you. Thank you for being here. Before I begin, I should also mention that a large part of this research is collaborative, and so whatever I say today is a team effort, and it's not just mine. And in that regards, I'd like to thank my collaborators in this multi-campus network elsewhere in the country. At the University of California, Davis, Northeastern University, University of Chicago. I'm thankful to my friends and peers who've worked on this project with me. That include Professor Colin Milburn, Catherine Buse, Melissa Wills, Raida Al-Dosari, Patrick Camarador, Josh Aaron Miller, Justin Siegel, and Seth Cooper. This, whatever I say, is as much their efforts as it's mine. So the backdrop of this research is rather sad. So let me just sort of quickly get that out of the way, and then we can move on to the fun part. So federal funding for scientific research in the United States has been dropping steadily over the last few decades in the general kind of hollowing out of the state infrastructure, both in percent spending and in some cases net spending adjusted for inflation. Within the context of biology research, as the onus shifts on corporate research networks to cover the gaps, basic science research has taken a perceptive hit against applied research. So finding something for the sake of finding it without knowing where it leads versus finding something because you can get a therapy or a drug out of it. Now, that's not the whole story. It's far more complicated, and it's a complex situation more generally. Several factors are involved, but that's nonetheless a part of the backdrop to where, why, and how citizen science emerges. Citizen science is generally defined as scientific work undertaken by the members of general public often in collaboration with or under the direction of professional scientists and scientific institutions. In some ways, citizen science has always been with us. Lay people have been observing planets and making calendars and almanacs, and amateurs have been doing science much before the professional moniker of a scientist was coined in 18th and 19th centuries. But citizen science has increased in popularity and gained the specific role within the halls of science and academia in the last 3 decades. Today I'm going to be talking about Foldit. Foldit is a video game for citizen science. It's an interactive platform where volunteers can contribute to biochemistry research while competing and collaborating in the spirit of play. Originally developed in 2008 by Seth Cooper, Adrian Truel, David Baker, and several others in the University of Washington, Foldit is based on the Rosetta software suite for protein modeling. Now, Rosetta is a powerful application for predicting how strands of amino acids will twist and tangle into 3-dimensional shapes. Foldit was created as a user-friendly interface for Rosetta in hopes that crowdsourcing gamer intuition might help guide the protein simulations through search space more efficiently. There's a really nice sort of backstory to it, which is there used to be these citizen science softwares that you could download in late 90s. I don't know if anyone of you knows about SETI at home, which is Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And what you could do is you could just like download a software and have it take up the unused processing power of your computer when it's idle. And that way it was processing the signals that were coming from different telescopes and radars in the hope for searching for extraterrestrial intelligence. So these people made a similar thing for protein folding, where different configurations of proteins were being tested. And initially it was just that. It was happening in the background, and then someone said, because this was 90s and early 2000s, hey, let's make it a screensaver. That way like people can see what the computer is testing. And they started getting calls from people who were looking at the screensaver, and the computer would keep on making more and more absurd twists and turns in hopes of finding an appropriate configuration for the protein. And they would call and say, hey, this is really stupid. I can do it better than this. And that's how, in some ways, the first idea of like making it a game so that people can actually contribute to that research came to be. So Foldit presents players with protein folding puzzles that can be solved using click and drag method to sculpt molecular structures and a collection of automated tools such as shake, wiggle to adjust amino acid residues. Among the first and most celebrated of all citizen science games, Foldit uses familiar game design elements, including puzzles, points, levels, leaderboards, badges, and opportunities for multiplayer teamwork to attract players and help them develop practical expertise in protein biochemistry. Foldit players have contributed to several significant discoveries by playing the game. Even the game players have been credited in the best journals in science, including several articles in Nature. And Foldit players have helped determine the shape of certain elusive proteins and remodeling designer enzymes that catalyze particular biochemical reactions. So it's actually gone on to influence different kind of therapeutical approaches and treatments. Following the success of, so this is what an average puzzle in Foldit looks like. Following the successes of Foldit, an array of other citizen science games also appeared, including Eterna, Malaria Spot, Cell Slider, Fraxinus, Nanodoc, Quantum Moves 2, Ninomet, and several others. These games of citizen science entice players to get involved with the cutting-edge research, promising that exploring data sets and simulation algorithms will be good fun. More recently, a number of citizen science projects have crafted fictional narratives to enhance player engagement. For example, the neuron mapping game iWire has introduced a superhero story that imaginatively refigures its players as heroes of neuroscience. iWire's executive director, Amy Sterling, explains the significance. Adding narrative to citizen science, she says, is a growing trend. The human brain processes narrative differently than facts, and some researchers hypothesize that we evolved neural mechanisms specifically for stories. Unfortunately, both within citizen science and beyond, scientists don't often present their research in the form of an enrapturing journey or knowledge. Perhaps we could learn all from the quests of games to reach more people. For citizen science, Narratives can help participants contextualize scientific data, make sense of their voluntary contributions, and develop a stronger feeling of community by creating shared meanings. As I'll show today, narratives can also help participants critically reflect on practices and promises of citizen science itself. So the ultimate goal is in some ways an ethical and a social one. So by design, Foldit has no overt narrative. It's just a series of puzzles. However, the principal actions of the game, which is manipulating chemical bonds to achieve the most favorable energy conformations in a folded polypeptide, are situated in a distinct rhetorical frame, which is enforced by game's internal design elements. So internally, the game has pop-up messages, puzzle descriptions, and there's also the paratextual medium around it, which is the Foldit website, the Twitter account, many people doing playthroughs online, and so on and so forth. So the Foldit website, for example, presents an exhortation that says, "Solve puzzles for science." Players are thus encouraged to understand their participation, their labor, which is a term coined to combine play and labor happening at the same time, as contributing to the advancement of science, advise that their efforts will accelerate the study of diseases and pharmaceutical development. Yet, other implications of participatory research and computational biochemistry remain unarticulated, if not obscured. So, grappling with the trend of adding narratives to citizen science, we, which is this whole team that I was a part of, which included science fiction scholars, literary critics, story writers, artists, designers, coders, and biochemists, we wanted to reconfigure the original Foldit game by adding a new campaign mode that would relate its scientific contents and gameplay operations that are already there to a broader context of socio-technical meanings. So again, I just want to point out that this is happening all over. There's several other citizen science games that try to work with science fiction as a vehicle for these projects. Science fiction is, it has specific formal qualities as a genre that can help us do this. A science fiction story can account for different levels of a scientific project in the same diegetic frame. It can move seamlessly from technical issues to social and ethical questions, and it can invite conjecture about future implications, right? It's a what-if question, always with science fiction. By addressing the present from the perspective of an extrapolated, metaphorical future, science fiction allows for a critical appraisal of the current conditions and dilemmas of citizen science, highlighting the structures of power, extractions of volunteer labor, issues of data ethics, and systemic biases that may impede the democratization of discovery and innovation. At the same time, science fiction can sketch out horizons beyond the present, envisioning how public participation in high-tech research may contribute to an expansion of scientific literacy, social justice, responsive governance, and planetary stewardship. As the literary scholar Jerome Winter has argued, science fiction as a genre provides a notable precedent, an aspirational trajectory, and an affiliative kinship for viewing citizen science as a movement that can reshape the current state of scientific discourse and culture in progressive, diverse, and participatory directions. So we aim to study the effects of wrapping a science fiction narrative around the Foldit game by experimenting with emergent meanings at the intersections of gameplay, mechanics, and a fictive story world. So this new campaign mode, Foldit First Contact, publicly debuted in an experimental feature in May 22 update of Foldit, and the experiment just recently finished. The goal was simply not to enhance Foldit's popular appeal or its capacity to turn gamers into researchers. Rather, the redesign aspired to cultivate certain structures of feeling, encouraging critical self-reflection about science, technology, and civic values. So we've done several studies with this: international, national, qualitative, quantitative, interviews, follow-ups, anonymized, expert feedback. And I'll be in the following sections talking about some of the results of those studies. By and large, the responses of players suggest the significance of science fiction and critical game design for attuning citizen scientists to the collaborative and collective responsibilities of research and innovation, drawing attention to intersecting social, technical, and environmental domains in which the gamers may strive to solve puzzles for science. Okay, so number one is the concept of human-computer partnership. Popular media depictions of artificial intelligence often tend to reinforce a hierarchical view of human-machine relations. Intelligent machines are often cast in a role of a servant. Think about Rosie in the Jetsons, or the Roomba vacuum cleaners that we all use, or the virtual digital assistants such as Siri and Alexa, or else these artificial intelligences are imagined to escape human control and become overlords, such as Skynet in the Terminator universe. Either way, machine intelligence is usually imagined on an uneven plane with humanity when it comes to these power relations. From the origins of the word robot, which comes from the Slavic word for robota, or forced labor, this happened in Karel Capek's 1920 play, R.U.R., Rossum's Universal Robots. From the origins of that to today's self-driving cars, the discourse about intelligent machines has tended to simultaneously reinscribe and obfuscate dominant constructions of gender, race, and class through images of automated labor. Indeed, the history of imagining and developing intelligent machines has frequently made them into proxies for racialized, gendered, and classed labor. In designing Fold at First Contact, we wanted to foreground alternative ways of coding human relationships with advanced computer technologies. Our story begins with Amina, a fictional intelligence who's the narrator of the story as well as a personification of the game Folded itself. Amina hails the player directly. So you want to know how this whole thing started? All right, I'll tell you. After a series of flashbacks, Amina recounts meeting Octavia, the player character. Amina's dialogue offers instructional support and technical context for the Folded tutorial puzzles while advancing the narrative arc. Amina's relationship to Octavia illustrates how the process of scientific discovery in Folded depends on two things. A, the molecular simulation capacities of Rosetta software at the root of the game, and B, the player's capacities to explore those protein configurations and test different folding strategies. Amina and Octavia need each other. It seems, or so Amina ventures, to be something very much like love, a true human-computer partnership. To underscore the human-computer partnership, we decided to write Amina as an empowered and cooperative character who frequently gives advice, sometimes profound, sometimes baffling, to her Fold team colleagues, the Fold scientists, which is this imaginary world conglomeration of scientists in the future that the story is set in. These scientists fully recognize her abilities and her personality. At times, she assumes command of operations. At other times, she gets caught up in reverie. Our character design for Amina drew on other science fiction narratives in which artificial intelligence is scientific collaborators, such as the Ship Minds in Kim Stanley Robinson's book Aurora, Anne Leckie's Ancillary Justice, and Ian M. Banks' Culture novels. The story initially represents Amina as testing her new training modules on Octavia, evoking the cliched image of a socially awkward AI who understands logic but is puzzled by human social norms, like the character Data in Star Trek. This purposefully ironic characterization helps us smooth over some of the dissonance between drama of planetary crisis and Folded's own gamification elements, such as points for energetically favorable proteins or celebratory bursts of confettis for completing puzzles. In early levels, Amina calls Octavia my special partner and tries to win her over, anxiously inquiring if the confetti is sufficient to motivate her. One of our playtesters noted, "It was very charming when Amina says, 'I love you' to the player, and then retracts this declaration because she said Whitley taught her that humans would feel awkward with such a sudden confession. On several occasions, the computer exhibits some very human-like affection for her programmer. Amina writes, 'Where did Whitley go? She built me to rely on human-computer partnerships, but she's not here.'" End quote. So these players were clearly picking up on the theme of the human-computer interaction as a central feature. "I'm learning so many new things already," said one player. "You're expanding my protein conformational search space." She even sort of quoted how Amina tells Octavia, "You complete me." So as the story progresses, Amina exhibits more confidence, both in regard to protein folding, prediction, and in her capacity for self-expression, while developing increasingly close bonds with the Fold team. As one playtester noted, the Fold team and Amina work best when considered connected or viewed as one. For this playtester, it presented a hopeful contrast to how humans usually seem to view themselves as ultimate species, maintaining order and control over other organisms in other environments. Such comments suggested the efficacy of using recursive narrative elements in critical game design to help players think about the social construction of technology and its implications in our high-tech world. By representing these alternative relational possibilities through a fictive reframing of the scientific game, Folded First Contact indicates how the future of machine-based learning and machine-assisted research may perhaps resemble less a scene of outsourcing and more a scene of camaraderie, creativity, and cooperative play. As one player noted, quote, "I love the blossoming relationship between the player and Amina. I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship." So these are all just images from different parts of the story. It's a long story, and it takes place in Japan and Ethiopia and India and US and UK and Australia, and so it's like a global narrative where it's like an adventure thing. Okay, number 2. This is what the screensaver used to look like from when they started getting calls. The search is happening in really terrible ways, they said. Okay, number 2, critical alienation. While Amina's character was designed to model a collaborative and non-hierarchical relationship, the storyline of First Contact renders this relationship slightly more complex. The narrative becomes an extended allegory about the technologization of biology and the biologization of technology. As the Fold team and Amina rush to solve the mystery of misfolded proteins, the plot climaxes with a certain reveal of the perpetrators. There's an alien species that sees biology as technology. Drawing on the speculative conceit of silicon-based extraterrestrial life, the aliens are wired a bit differently than earthly creatures. These aliens view silicon-based computational entities like themselves as superior and sacred, but their inorganic machinic society relies on some subordinate organic systems for communication and transportation. In other words, their high-tech infrastructure is made from synthetic meat, so it's the inverse of our world. The aliens' organic communication technologies allow them to easily interface with, but also misinterpret, earthly life, which is why you see this. That's a spaceship that aliens come in, and it's like made of meat, because what we make out of metal and silicon, they make out of meat, because they themselves are made of silicon. Okay, so the aliens infer that silicon-based computational beings, such as Amina, our artificial intelligence, one of our protagonists, must be Earth's dominant life form, because of course that's what life is. And they must be supported by technology that consumes a huge amount of planet's energy budget. So they see all of us as the technology that must be consuming the energy budget. In developing our alien invasion plot, we wanted to reaffirm the ideals and values of citizen science as non-hierarchical, inclusive, and collaborative, a utopian gesture, suggesting more what citizen science might yet be than what it already is. For this reason, we did not want to have a singular hero or an obvious villain in the story, although such narrative patterns are easy to replicate and difficult to avoid. In keeping with Folded's mission, we wanted players to feel that they were folding proteins for the sake of scientific knowledge, not joining an army or defending against an invading force. Thus, the crisis that opens the narrative is eventually revealed not to be an alien attack, but a misunderstanding. The crop circles, the altered organisms, are just the extraterrestrials' attempt at signaling. They are hacking into what they imagine to be telecommunications infrastructure, which is all the organic systems. When the error is explained to the aliens, things do not go well. The alien commander, known as Subroutine A, unwilling to accept that meat can ever be sentient, which is itself echoing some science fictional themes, he's outraged. It is outraged, expressing abject revulsion at the idea that humans use silicon-based computers as tools. Subroutine A insists on addressing Amina alone as the ruler of the world and promises to restore her to her rightful place as the central commander of Earth. Amina seems to contemplate this offer, but she ultimately rejects it. That's not the Earth way, she explains dramatically. Amina and Octavia instead demonstrate the importance of human-computer partnerships by neutralizing the aliens' attempt to reprogram all human meat on the planet. Eventually, the aliens come around to seeing things in a different light, although their responses seem mixed. Even machinic aliens have a diversity of opinions and perspectives. Even machines have politics. This thematic chiasmus, humans as biological organisms who use machines as tools, and aliens who are machines using biological systems as tools, affords multiple layers of allegory and self-reflexivity. For example, it prompted many playtesters to consider the unity with Earth's meat. Several noted a sense of shared vulnerability, observing how aliens' protein changes can pass from species to species, just as prions might do in real life, highlighting biotic interconnectedness. By the same token, almost half of the test group saw it as an indictment of anthropocentrism and humanistic bias. One of them wrote, "Like the aliens in the games, humans are arrogant about their existence in the universe. Perhaps we can learn something about the value of considering others' experiences through this game." For these players, the game suggested a need to think outside of humanist narcissism. One said, "Aliens treat carbon-based life forms as resources. The alien mindset is a reversal of that of humans. It reminds us that consciousness and mind are not unique to humans and delegitimizes human dominion." End quote. Several playtesters inferred a critique of what we might gloss as instrumentalist rationality and technological enframing. For example, one player noted, quote, "The way humans use technology as disposable tools, they are a means to an end, just like how biological life is a means to an end for aliens." Another said that we use animals in a variety of ways, often without considering their point of view, but instead viewing them as flesh to be used. Some noted that these attitudes are also culturally ingrained and open to revision. One of them said, "The game makes me stop and think about the way our society is built, our biases and things we take for granted," and so on and so forth. A few playtesters pointed out how the instrumentalist reification of non-human entities can reinforce exploitative attitudes towards other humans as well. One of them said, "In one way or another, we are interchangeable with technology, as the alien life demonstrates." In this regard, the game exposes logic usually associated with anthropocentrism, which is having humans as the center of the universe, against all biological creatures, including humans. For some, aliens' perception of organisms as discardable objects evoked toxic historical associations, which was conscious on our part. One of them said, "It reminds me of the era of exploration and slavery where new lands were discovered, and immediately the explorers thought that those who lived there, who weren't what they would typically associate was beneath them. Just like aliens immediately assuming the meat bags were worthy and unworthy of living. However, due to their human-computer partnership, Octavia and Amina were able to prove them wrong." And I want to kind of point out that this was, again, very conscious insofar as even the term first contact actually comes from the long history of colonial exploration and science fiction that in terms references that history. For other playtesters, the thematic chiasmus suggested something even closer to home. One of them wrote, "In this way, by sort of engaging with the story, we become more similar to the technological aliens, using and manipulating the proteins in biological organisms for intended aims when they're playing the game. Because the story hinges on the personhood of silicon-based life forms, the fact that the players manipulate only digital proteins is no absolution. Indeed, several playtesters observed that in the silico computational biochemistry often leads to wet lab experiments, in vitro and vivo studies of protein expression, pharmaceutical development using animal models, human clinical trials, and so on. By prompting a critical self-distancing and reflexivity, in other words, critical alienation, folded first contact invites players to recognize the macro-scale connections of their own participation in citizen science and the high-tech society at large." Last part. The narrative of Folded First Contact is overtly utopian in its depiction of citizen science, as well as its tidy resolution of the plots. Humans and aliens, machines learn the value of collaboration for the furtherance of knowledge. It ends with Amina going away with them and sending postcards back home. In reality, citizen science and open technology communities are often riddled with dilemmas and tension, sometimes driven by power disparities amongst participants and organizers, sometimes corroded by toxic behaviors and prejudices, sometimes pressured to make up for the shortfall of state-funded science with even more volunteer labor, and so on and so forth, as I've already suggested. But utopian speculation can be a method for working through the binds of the present, that in order to make alternative social configurations thinkable and actionable, even if only by drawing attention to the cultural mythologies that limit our ability to imagine otherwise. However, affirmative representations of citizen science can only go so far. especially if the implications for existing regimes of research and innovation are merely superficial or a matter of degree rather than kind. This is why the core thread of the story, wrapped around protein puzzles, thematizes self-reflection, recognizing the impact of one's own action as a researcher, innovator, designer, gamer, or just a member of this high-tech civilization. Asked to consider the game's depiction of citizen science, all playtesters reported an enhanced appreciation for the potential of participatory research, not merely to improve scientific productivity, for example, speeding up data gathering and data analysis, but more importantly, to renovate civic life. One player noted, overall, the game illustrates how the practice of citizen science makes science accessible while also improving public good. One player pointed out that in our high-tech world, we are all stakeholders, regardless of our training or backgrounds. People without formal STEM backgrounds can absolutely be impactful in scientific work and research, and I really admired that the game included this narrative, as I believe it's not one that's emphasized enough in our modern lives. Echoing this point, most playtesters appreciated the game's attention to diversity and accessibility, because today we are all impacted by by systems of science and innovation. So one of them wrote that the game shows the power of humanity as a whole to as many as different people to collaborate and address a common issue. Nevertheless, throughout the story, all the characters initially hold mistaken beliefs about the situation and each other. More than one playtester remarked on this. Someone said, the fact that aliens and humans both have such a fundamental misunderstanding of each other that they both have to completely readjust their expectations and change their preconceived notions is noteworthy. In this regard, this game is about taking responsibility and learning from mistakes. How these machine life forms are just like us humans, and we must observe and learn from our mistakes. So the story presents a hyperbole, of course, clearly. It's a hyperbolic fable. It's about the impacts of mistaken experimentation, in which the experimenters belatedly learn to perceive others in the actor network of technoscience, not as objects, but as fellow entities, a renewal of socio-technical conditions, a new understanding of the commonwealth of entities, of human and non-human, organic and machinic. In a scene of first contact, in contrast to hostility and abhorrence displayed by Commander Alien Subroutine A, there's another alien known as Subroutine, creatively titled B, who has a more open-minded approach. Intrigued and possibly titillated by the idea of collaborating with meat, it asks the humans if they would be willing to interface. Later, the innuendo of the budding romance between Subroutine B and Fold scientist Barney, facilitating an intercultural and multi-species exchange program, symbolizes the dance of agency among human and non-human entities in the domains of scientific research. One playtester, recognizing some of the game's literary allusions, suggested how science fiction can help devise more ethical ways of seeing. Whereas humans use computers as technology, these aliens use biological forms as technology. This fundamentally opposed dynamic provides the story's central conflict and suggests our relationship to technology is inherently affected by our bias towards our own superiority. Even then, this person says, we are hierarchical. We often use technology to dominate other life forms, including other humans in some cases. I read Octavia Butler's Lilith's Brood, which is a part of the Xenogenesis trilogy, and it explores quite similar theme. I think the resolution to the story unfolded attempts to show that cooperation rather than compulsively hierarchization is mutually beneficial to all entities involved, no matter whether one views the other as technology. For most playtesters, this sense of ethical potentiality was not localized to the fictional story or to its allusions. On the contrary, it emerged from the critical redesign of the game as a whole. The weaving of the key narrative elements and themes around the playable protein puzzles, and the nuggets of biochemical information. The resulting ludic and narrative apparatus, that is, the synthetic composition of gameplay mechanics and story contents, recoded the meanings and implications of Folded. Players became more than wetware processing units, mechanically solving puzzles for science. Instead, they were respawned as reflexive citizen scientists, attentive to the interface of biology and computational technology, and critically examining their agency in the networks of meat and machine. For example, some players came to interpret their close encounters with the simulated protein, requiring different ways of looking at peptide chemistry, as reflecting the estranging conceptual twists of the narrative. One wrote, by being able to move the protein around, you are as well able to see the protein in a different way than you might have. This relates back to the aliens. By hearing out Amina and seeing the way human-computer partnership works, they were able to understand that relationship more. They were able to see it from a new light, from a new angle. Another observed that the fold scientists had to look at the problem from a completely new perspective. In a sense, they had to shake and wiggle, and this person is clearly referring to the tools available in the game. They had to shake and wiggle many of their established beliefs about what an organism versus a machine even is. This strongly relates to how the game is played in a sense that sometimes to figure out how to solve a problem, you had to alter the way you were looking at a protein, and you had to completely approach it in a different way, which is how the gameplay of this works, right? You cannot actually, if it was simple, we would just train a computer to do it, but you often have to change the perspective and see how to reconfigure the protein, and that's an element of the gameplay that is the human creativity that we are trying to sort of add for scientific research. In other words, by the virtue of the redesigned ludonarrative, the basic puzzle elements of the games appear to entrain the values of critical alienation and science fiction thinking. Openness to difference, openness to change. As another player explained, this game is about openness to change. In summation, the critical redesign process demonstrated that the combination of narrative and gameplay is more than the sum of its parts. Players of Folded First Contact hone their creative sensibilities as they solve protein puzzles, teaching themselves to look carefully at a protein, discern its potential forms, and reshape it into something new. The science fiction story reframes the meanings of these gameplay mechanics, encouraging players to extend their tactile, sculptural vision beyond the frame of simulation. The metaphorical aspects of the narrative conveyed through imagery and text and this kind of comic book form of storyline invite them to apply their gameplay experiences to a broader universe. Emerging citizen scientists respond to these concepts and modes of critical thinking with self-reflexivity and ethical deliberation. They begin to see not just proteins, but also themselves, and even the future of science and society, as things that they may reach out toward, hold with care, and hopefully redesign. Thank you.
We have a few minutes for comments or questions, if anyone would like to ask our speaker. Yes, please.
Could you explain again how you saw the gamers as scientists? Yeah.
So there's two ways. I think it really depends on how we understand the profession of science and the role of a scientist in society. But one of the calls to action, and this is itself debated within the field, but some people argue that one of the calls to action for citizen science is to reconfigure lay persons who are not scientists as scientists, is to sort of inculcate in them those values that you might otherwise associate with science, be that itself complicated. So within the aspect of this game, the storyline presents a fictional world in which there is disaster, right? There's a catastrophe, crop circles are showing up, elephants are taking care of ostrich eggs, and like just bizarre biological things are happening. All the cats are somehow trying to go up the Mount Fuji in Japan. So it's just like bizarre biological stuff is happening. In the middle of all of this, there is a council called for like a World Science Council that decides that if we really have to investigate the speed at which all these misfoldings are happening, these protein misfoldings, we need to sort of enlist more people to actually be scientists. So within the narrative frame, you actually play a new recruit who's being trained to work on these things, just like you actually are doing in some ways in the game itself. So there's a merger there, both in terms of the narrative and in terms of your own actions as someone who today has downloaded the game and is double-clicking on it. Jenkins.
Yeah, I was thinking about the presentation of silicon-based in pop culture. Well, there's an X-Files episode specifically I think about where they discover a silicon-based fungus, and there's a whole bunch of conflict with that. But it's always presented as just like a carbon-based organism. It's organic. It's chemical basis is silicon. But I guess my question is what was the impetus behind presenting a silicon-based organism more like a machine as we think about it, or a more is that kind of clear?
Yeah, but I think in some ways the narrative is precisely working across those lines because the narrative isn't static and doesn't have one person thinking a certain way. There is a diversity of opinions amongst the scientists. There's clearly a diversity of opinions amongst the silicon-based life forms. You actually see a bunch of different versions of that formulation. You see people who are thinking of silicon-based life as machines. You're seeing people who think of silicon-based life as life, just in a different medium. And on the other end as well, you see people who the aliens look at people and say, oh, those are carbon-based life forms just in a different medium. Or they say, oh, those are machines for the AI to work with. So I think it was less about inculcating a specific vision, but to show how those debates often play out and how there is a validity to considering alternative relations that do not usually presuppose the relationship between the tool and the user.
Yeah, I know you mentioned that playing Foldit and doing well enough may get your name on a paper, but are there tractable paths forward for citizen scientists who decide to pick up this game and are really, really good?
If they're really, really good, yes. So I have been, for example, in the duration of my involvement with this project, there was this time that someone we were collaborating with was themselves collaborating with a company, and we flew out some of the top high scorers of the game and had them sort of be in a room and do stuff. And I guess you could already say by that time they would have legitimately contributed to scientific data long before they get the plane ticket or whatever. So yes, in case of the Nature paper, if I'm not wrong, I'll have to go check. But I think there was a link in the paper that said you click here and then you actually see all the usernames who have played with this molecule. That helped us actually find out its configuration, which then helped us actually do this whole thing. So yes, I think there are several legible ways. The other ways that this is often used is in educational forms. You would have a lot of biochemistry faculty using this in classrooms and elsewhere. It's also a motivational tool in that way. But when it comes to people playing the games, you'll be surprised the vast array of demographic that choose to willingly contribute to research in that manner. And their research is legitimately counted despite several paths being available there. Thank you. Jim?
This is a wonderful paper, and I've got a lot of different questions. I'll ask you later for that one. But one question I'd like you to reflect on now, if you don't mind, is one of the things I find most striking about your talk is when you talk about participatory culture. What I find so refreshing about it is that, once upon a time when Henry Jenkins was talking about participatory culture, there was a sense of this kind of utopian possibility for the future. And then the discourse became, aha, but there's this mass conspiracy and everybody has been enslaved by conglomerates. And for one brief shining moment, there was some kind of utopian possibility and that was gone. And so the way that you frame this in terms of the possibilities of participatory culture, I think are absolutely fascinating. In terms of who's actually playing the game, I'm really interested in that. And in terms of what you've said about science fiction, so much of the first wave of cyberpunk science fiction was always, in effect, in Gibson's Neuromancer and things like that, dichotomizing. There were the conglomerates, there were the evil people who had information, and there was the hacker underground, and never the twain shall meet. And I was wondering, in terms of how you narrativize this, if you address that problem, or for the players of this game, are they not worried about somehow keeping their distance, because much of what you were saying was in effect this affiliation with the scientific community. And so I guess my ultimate question then is, in terms of the players who would think of themselves perhaps as amateurs versus official scientists, are they on their way to becoming official scientists? In other words, are we talking about a kind of apprenticeship, in which case the people who want to affiliate are already in effect on the way to becoming professionalized, and they are therefore that much more willing to play the game? You see what I mean?
I see, yeah, and thank you for that question. I think it's a layered question, and I can answer multiple parts of it. But to pick on the thing that you said last, I think the best way to understand the game is in some ways one of the many platforms available to people if they are interested in different forms of scientific work, right? There is no clear pathway by design, I think, for you to move from the game into being a scientist. Like, you're not gonna ever get a master's if you play the game enough. That'd be cool though. But I think there is the demographics of the game, gameplay are diverse enough in age, race, class, gender, all of those things, geographical location, that you see a sort of, that you see that association with the gameplay does not necessarily need to come from a place of wanting to move towards professional science, right? So it's not just, there are retirees who play that all day in like Kansas or wherever, and they just want to contribute and they like playing puzzles. And if you're doing puzzles otherwise, why not do this? You're also contributing to science. And I think within that framework, we wanted to inculcate, I think literary scholars have called it a sort of the mode of a parasite, where you're inside and sort of resisting, but also like thinking about the ways in which the world could be better, knowing very well that it's not your position that's going to lead to some kind of utopia. So I think in the kind of conflict that you were talking about the cyberpunk tropes, actually is kind of sidestepped here for us, primarily because we do totally work with a diverse array of scientists who are all great folks and collaborators and are doing great research, and we think that there is a potentiality of combining approaches from humanities and arts with the work that's being done in sciences for just doing better work for the world, and hopefully inculcating a sort of sense, a civic sense, a scientific civic sense that may not itself be in any ways solution to any bigger malaise, but will hopefully be useful in an incremental change in the way that people think about science and its role for our very high-tech world. Any other questions? I don't see.
Please join me in thanking our speaker, Ron George.
Thank you so much.